Welcome all. This is Srimayi Majumder from Swami Vivekanand Institute of Modern Science. To begin with, I have planned to discuss the movements or the directions of communication in different segments. The first and the foremost segment will be the downward communication, which is the most important step in the movements of communication, which will be followed by the upward direction, which again will be followed by the lateral movement or the lateral direction of communication, and finally we shall discuss the diagonal movement of communication. Now, the first thing that I want to stress upon is why is downward communication so very important? Because downward movement is the first movement which begins the cycle of communication in the corporate world. If the seniors do not instruct, explain, teach, motivate the subordinates, the corporate movement does not begin at all. Therefore, downward communication is the most important direction of communication. As we can see in the diagram that the managing director starts instructing, there are managers below him in the finance, marketing, production, personnel, etc. These people take up the instructions and they gradually pass it down to their subordinates. It may be accountant, cashier, salesman, quality controller, etc., etc. And thereby the entire movement begins with this downward communication. Now, why do we have downward communication at all? Obviously, there are purposes, there are objectives of downward communication. These objectives are directly related with the advantages of downward communication. What are the advantages and what are the objectives? If we concentrate on the purposes, on the objectives, we can see the first thing. The first point says that it is needed to give directions to the juniors, to the subordinates. Without the directions, obviously, the benefit is associated with this, that without direction, the activities will not start at all. Point 2, to explain organizational policies or programs unless and until the corporate world, the employees understand the movement, the aim of the movement, the activities will not be fruitful, activities will not begin at all. Third is to know how effectively a person is performing his job. Unless and until there is assessment, there is this testing, which is a downward movement, which is applied to the subordinates, we cannot have quality control, we cannot know what is happening. To motivate the employees to improve the performance, whether in quality or in activity, whatever, unless and until there is a direct motivation through downward movement, the subordinates, the juniors will not give their best. And finally, all these processes in combination is to educate the subordinates. To educate the subordinates and to get the best performance is the outcome of downward movement or downward communication. We are now going to discuss the problems which arise in the downward movement. No movement is free from trouble. Obviously, when messages are passed on from the top to the bottom, there will be inevitable problems, and the first one is distortion of messages. Obviously, this distortion, when it comes through different persons in the hierarchy, it goes through filtering, coloring, twisting, or condensing. This can be for personal issues, this can be for corporate issues. The other thing which is very important in the process of downward movement is the delays that take place. It is very important if the line of hierarchy is pretty long, there can be delays. The third factor, which is a big problem, is either the message is overloaded, where unnecessary details are given more important, or it is underloaded, where the main points are not suitably explained or not given equal importance. Therefore, one has to be very, very particular when the messages are being transmitted. It must not be overloaded or underloaded. The other factor, which is last but not the least, is the bureaucratic degeneration or the power concentration in the hands of the people at the top. When power is concentrated in a particular segment, communication is not transparent, communication is not free flowing, and that is because people want to dominate, to have control, to have power over communication. This is also aggravated by the fact that there are sycophancy. People act hand in glove with the superiors. There is enough flattery, and therefore the movement, the smooth movement, the transparent movement from top to bottom does not take place. So, what are the ways we can remove these obstacles? First, the entire order or the ladder of movement should be transparent, should be well informed, so that everyone knows what is happening at every step. Point 2, there should be a positive atmosphere of friendly atmosphere of communication. If there is trust and friendliness, then the climate of communication will be clean. Point 3, too much power must not be concentrated in single hand or a few hands. This is one area which gives birth to corruption in the line of communication. This automatically goes down to the fourth point, which is proper channelization. It should pass through the ladder, through the hierarchy in the proper order, so that everyone who is involved in the process are aware, everybody is aware of what is happening. And lastly, messages must be absolutely clear so that everyone understands when it comes to him or her. So these are the areas. If we check into these areas, downward communication becomes very effective, and once again it is the most important movement in the process of communication. So that was the basics of downward communication. We shall continue with the other movements in the following presentations, namely upward, lateral and diagonal movements. Thank you.